A millionaire followed his maid after work, and what he found transformed his world. My life was a fortress built on a single foundation: absolute control. Control dictated my business dealings, my investment strategies, and meticulous oversight of every potential failure point. So when I first noticed minor items vanishing from my pantry, a packet of pasta here, a few canned goods, some fruit, it didn't spark fury or even suspicion. Instead, it activated that fundamental drive that had built my fortune: the compulsion to understand, to expose, to resolve. Initially, I considered simple explanations. Perhaps a chef's oversight with inventory, maybe staff members sharing supplies. But an intuition, sharp and insistent, told me otherwise, and I've always trusted that feeling. That's when I chose direct observation. No confrontation, no questions asked. On a specific Wednesday evening, I parked 2 blocks from my Murrumbidgee Hills estate, lights off, engine silent. From my vantage point, I watched, anticipating someone making a mistake. The last person I expected was Sarah. She'd been my employee for more than 5 years. Dependable, reserved, practically unseen. I saw her emerge through the gate, burdened by 2 weighty grocery bags. My chest tightened, not with a sense of betrayal, but with the sudden, jarring realization that I had never truly seen her before. To me, she was simply part of the background, like the polished marble floors she maintained, necessary, functional, utterly unknown. My pursuit led me through the labyrinth of subway lines, across various stations, navigating transfers I hadn't experienced since my university days. Each jolt, each shove, every unfamiliar noise made it feel as though I'd landed on an alien world. She never glanced back, her focus unwavering, her steps rhythmic and determined. I maintained a distance of just 3 steps as she entered a residential building, a humble, somewhat dilapidated structure, yet vibrant with life. Children's laughter spilled from the entrance. Music drifted from open windows. She ascended the staircase laboriously. I saw her stumble momentarily, perhaps from weariness or discomfort, but she pressed on. From the landing, I overheard her voice, gentle and comforting, followed by another, a young boy's voice, frail, struggling for breath, for words. "Mom," he managed, "the doctor says my pressure is falling again." Her reply was immediate, tender. "I know, baby. We'll split the medication this week, just like before." My world stopped. My thoughts reeled, trying to process what I just absorbed. Share the pills again? The pieces clicked into place. The bags, the food, the missing medication from my own supply. It wasn't theft. It was desperation. It was survival. I withdrew silently before they could detect my presence. A strange constriction filled my chest, not of embarrassment, but of a sensation long dormant: humility. The following morning, I sat at the breakfast table, gazing into my coffee. The steam ascended in a question mark shape. Sarah moved through the kitchen routine with her usual quiet efficiency, practically invisible. But now I truly saw her. Her hands trembled slightly as she poured juice. Her eyes were dim, not from fatigue but burdened by a profound weight, one that sleep wouldn't alleviate. I wanted to speak, to question her about the previous night, about the boy, about the medication. But my tongue remained still. How do you shatter years of silence with a single inquiry? Instead, I observed, I listened, and I recalled. Every day she arrived punctually. Every day she performed her tasks flawlessly, no complaints, no absences. She had never requested a salary increase, never sought assistance. And I, in turn, had never genuinely inquired about her life. I knew nothing of her reality, yet she was intimately familiar with mine. She dusted my photographs, polished my awards, organized my suits. She knew my preferred wine, my shower schedule, the book left unfinished on my nightstand. That evening I returned. Not to monitor, not out of suspicion, but driven by something else entirely, something I wasn't yet ready to name. I stood once more in the hallway listening. "Mom, I'm afraid. What if the medication isn't enough this time?" "Don't be. We'll manage, we always do." Her voice wavered. I could hear the deliberate effort to prevent it from breaking completely. On Saturday, I tracked her movements again, but this time her path didn't lead home. She walked past her street, carrying a container filled with aged books. I followed discreetly until we reached a modest community center. Neglected, walls tagged with graffiti, the fence broken. She entered and was immediately embraced by children, perhaps a dozen or more. They called her by name, they hugged her. A genuine smile lit her face. Then she began reading aloud to them. Her voice was clear, confident, compelling. She was no longer my invisible maid. She was someone transformed. A leader, a guide, a beacon of light in a place most would avoid. I leaned against the wall, astonished. Sarah, the woman who cleaned my windows and folded my towels, was dedicating her personal time, using her own resources, operating a reading program for underprivileged children. Without external support, without recognition, without even a thank you. And I had judged her for taking food. Something shifted within me. It wasn't pity. It was raw, undeniable admiration. The kind that makes you feel small. The kind that compels you to reassess everything you thought you knew about individuals, about social standing, about dignity. She wasn't stealing, she was enduring. She was serving her community. She was safeguarding a life. Not just her son's, but perhaps in a way I was only beginning to grasp, my own. If this narrative resonates with you as it did with me, please leave a comment. Share your reflections or recount an experience that altered your perception of someone you thought you understood. And don't forget to like and subscribe. There's more of this journey to share, and you won't want to miss the next turn. Monday arrived. I called in sick to the office. An utterly uncharacteristic act for someone in my position. But the prospect of attending meetings and reviewing stock reports felt utterly disconnected after what I'd witnessed, after realizing the confines of my own existence. I instructed my assistant to clear my schedule. I needed time, not for rest but for profound introspection. I spent the day exploring parts of the city I hadn't seen in decades. Lively markets, hidden alleyways, forgotten cafes. These were the forgotten corners of the very metropolis that had generated my wealth, yet a city I barely knew intimately. Everywhere I looked, I saw authentic lives unfolding, lives that didn't require my fortune or my corporation, merely my presence, my attention, my willingness to listen. I had lived too long under the delusion that people needed to impress me, when all I ever needed to do was truly notice them. Later that week, I visited the medical facility Sarah took her son to. I waited outside, leaning against a pillar. She arrived with him, guiding his steps gently, offering soft encouragement. I observed her speaking quietly to the receptionist, explaining her inability to cover the full cost of the medication. Could they wait? Could they divide the dosage? The answer was a firm no. I stepped forward. I requested to speak with the doctor, an acquaintance of mine, someone who owed me a few past favors. I outlined the situation briefly, without specifics, without naming Sarah. Just enough to capture attention, to open a necessary door. When Sarah turned and saw me, her expression held steady, no anger, no shock, simply a quiet resignation, as if she had anticipated this moment. You followed me again? Yes. Why? I wanted to understand. Initially it was suspicion, then curiosity. Now, it's something else. I'm still figuring it out. She nodded slowly, her lips forming a thin line. Not a smile, but something akin to acceptance or perhaps exhaustion. We don't want your help. I know. But I want to offer it anyway. She shook her head. We're not charity cases. No, you're not. You are stronger than almost anyone I've ever encountered. And that's precisely why I wish to help. Not out of pity but out of profound respect. Her eyes met mine fully for the first time. In them I witnessed everything. Years of struggle, nights of anxiety, mornings demanding courage. And beneath it all, a form of pride I had never recognized. Not the pride of wealth or acclaim, but the quiet dignity of survival. It fundamentally altered something within me, a change I couldn't reverse. I returned home that night and stood in the hallway outside my study, contemplating the shelves lined with awards, photographs, plaques. For the first time they appeared small, insignificant, hollow. None of them narrated the story Sarah lived daily. None of them carried the quiet burden she endured. And I, a man immersed in abundance, had never once comprehended genuine sacrifice. That night I made a resolution. One that would dismantle my established routine, disrupt my comfort, and perhaps, just perhaps, bring me closer to the person I had buried beneath layers of success. The subsequent Saturday I returned to the community center. This time I arrived bearing gifts. Dozens of books. Picture books, science books, tales of astronauts, animals, and hope. I informed no one, not even Sarah. I simply entered during their session and stood near the entrance until she noticed my presence. The children were the first to turn, their curious eyes brightening. Then her gaze found mine, and for a fleeting moment, I saw her hesitate, not from fear, but from uncertainty, as if unsure whether to ask me to leave or express gratitude. I raised the box slightly, a small gesture. I thought they might enjoy these. The children descended like a swarm, giggles, chatter, wide-eyed amazement at the vibrant covers and crisp pages. These were books that smelled not of dust or weariness, but of limitless possibility. Sarah stepped back, allowing them space to explore, to dream. "He likes you," she commented later as we stood slightly apart. "Who?" "My son, Ethan." I smiled. "He's a remarkable kid. He wants to be a doctor." "I know. He told me he wants to discover a cure not just for himself but for others." Her eyes softened. "That's Ethan. You've raised someone extraordinary." "No," she replied quickly. "I'm just a mother doing what mothers do." "Not all mothers," I countered. "Some retreat, some freeze, some pretend everything is fine. But you fight. Quietly. Fiercely." She looked away, lightly dusting her sleeve as if to conceal the emotion creeping into her voice. "I never planned to run a reading group or teach anything. I just couldn't bear the thought of these kids growing up believing no one cared about what they had to say. And now they speak. They read. They dream." For a long while we simply stood watching them, laughing, debating, pretending, just being children. Something shifted inside me again. The echo of my own past, the silence of rooms I never returned to, memories of people who raised me but never asked who I aspired to be. I never had what these children had now, what Sarah had given them. And for the first time in years, I yearned to be part of something larger, not for legacy or reputation but for genuine purpose. I didn't just want to donate. I wanted to belong, to show up, to listen, and perhaps to rebuild the man I had once hoped to become, long before wealth complicated everything. I didn't know precisely what that would look like yet, but I knew where its genesis lay, in showing up again the following Saturday and every Saturday thereafter. Those Saturdays became a ritual not only for the children but for me. I restructured my schedule, declined business dinners, disregarded invitations to exclusive galas. I informed my staff I was unavailable during those mornings. Some speculated I had taken up golf. Others whispered about a mysterious woman. And I offered no explanations, not because it was a secret but because it felt sacred. Sarah and I rarely engaged in deep conversation during the sessions. Our talk revolved around the books, the children, the laughter, the vibrant noise. It was enough. It was more than enough. Occasionally, Ethan would make his way over, his gait slightly unsteady, and sit beside me, reading slowly, deliberately tracing the words with his fingers. Once he asked, "Do you really think I can be a doctor?" I met his gaze. "You already are one. In here." I gently tapped his chest. "And if that heart of yours is half as strong as your mother's, you will change the world." He beamed, not necessarily because he fully believed it but because he desperately wanted to. The other children began calling me Uncle James or simply James. And for the first time since my parents passed, the sound of my name, stripped of formality or title, felt right, felt real. It was as though I had stepped into a part of myself I had forgotten existed. But not everyone was pleased. My niece Alexandra, the sole family member I remained close to, whom I had raised after my sister's death, started noticing the alterations. My absence from board meetings, the reduction in my public appearances, the contributions to programs with no apparent financial return. She cornered me one evening. "People are talking. They say you're unfocused, making illogical decisions. Perhaps they make sense to someone else." "Who?" "Your maid." The word was laced with contempt. "Her name is Sarah." "I don't care. You used to." She paused, allowing the silence to underscore her point. "Look, if you want to play the humanitarian, fine. But don't jeopardize your standing in the process." "Is that what you believe this is?" "I believe you're a lonely man trying to fill a void and she's convenient. That boy of hers, his illness, it makes you feel needed." "Perhaps it does. Then conduct it discreetly. Don't risk everything we've built." "What we built?" I was finally seeing it with clarity. Her vision of legacy, of empire, of authority, it was constructed on apprehension, on scarcity, on dominance. Mine, however, was evolving into something different. After she departed, I stood alone in my library. The silence felt altered this time, not empty but vast, ready to accommodate something new. And I knew Alexandra would never grasp it. But Sarah might. Ethan undoubtedly would. Because they didn't require me to be powerful. They simply needed me to be present. And that was the kind of man I was finally learning to be. Weeks after that exchange with Alexandra, one afternoon I revisited the clinic. Not to intervene this time, but to accompany. Sarah had called me hesitant, almost embarrassed. Ethan's recent tests indicated complications, a downturn. She didn't articulate the word, but I understood. Decline. I met them outside. She remained silent, simply nodding. He smiled upon seeing me. Hey, Uncle James. Did you bring more stories? Not today, buddy. But I brought myself. That's enough. Inside the waiting room was crowded, tense. Sarah sat rigidly, her hands tightly clasped. Ethan leaned against her, his eyes closed. The nurse called their names. I waited. An hour passed, then another. When the door finally opened, I rose. The doctor was familiar, Dr. Robinson. Brilliant, meticulous, honest. Can we speak privately? We moved to a separate room. He presented the scans, explained the complexities of the required surgery, the associated risks, the probabilities. We can attempt it, he stated. It's not guaranteed, but I believe it's feasible, provided we act swiftly. The expense. There won't be a discussion about cost, I interrupted. Just proceed. I signed the required documents that evening, arranged the financial transfer. No board approvals, no lengthy deliberations, just decisive action. When Sarah learned what I had done, she came to me. I instructed you not to get involved. I know. Why did you? Because I care. You shouldn't. I can't help it. She looked at me as if I had lost my senses. What do you expect in return? Nothing. No one gives away this much for nothing. I do. That's not true. You don't know me. Then help me, I said. Help me understand. So I did. I recounted everything about my parents, about Alexandra, about the empire I had constructed and the emptiness it had left behind. About the nights spent in my mansion, feeling utterly devoid of emotion, until I had followed her, until I had witnessed her struggle, until I had seen Ethan. Tears welled in her eyes, but she didn't allow them to fall. You should leave. I will. But understand this, I don't feel pity for you. I admire you. And regardless of the outcome, I am not abandoning this. She didn't respond, but she didn't prevent me from staying either. That was sufficient. The following morning, a letter arrived from Ethan. Dear Uncle James, thank you for being brave. For being different. For seeing us. I don't know what will happen in surgery, but if I don't make it, please know I'm glad I met you. You made my mom smile, and that's rare, truly rare. I wept for the first time in years. And I prayed, not out of religious conviction but out of sheer desperation. For the first time in my life, all the money in the world was insufficient, and all that mattered was a young boy, his mother, and a possibility. The day of the surgery dawned like an approaching storm we could perceive but couldn't avoid. It was early, the city still partially asleep, the sky painted in anxious gray. I personally drove them. Sarah sat silently in the front seat, her hands resting motionlessly on her knees. Ethan was in the back, softly humming an unfamiliar melody. Perhaps one he'd composed, perhaps a way to hold his fear at bay. At the hospital, everything felt sterile, rushed, impersonal. Nurses moved with practiced efficiency. Charts were exchanged, consent signed. Time seemed to pass in disconnected fragments until we were told, it's time. They allowed us to walk with him to the operating room doors. Sarah kissed his forehead, whispered something only he could hear. Then he turned to me. Uncle James, if I wake up, will you bring me another space book? I will. The largest one I can find. Cool. Maybe about Mars. Deal. And then he was gone. Sarah sat in the waiting area, I sat beside her. We spoke little, not much was needed. Every distant beep, every announcement over the intercom, we both flinched. After a while, she leaned against me just slightly, but enough to convey her trust, not in my resources, but in my presence during her fear. Hours stretched on. Finally, the surgeon emerged. He's stable. The procedure went well. There were complications, but we managed. He'll require extensive recovery, but right now he is here and he is fighting. Sarah expelled a breath she seemed to have held for days. She didn't cry, not there in front of them. But her hand sought mine and held on. When they permitted us to see him, he looked frail amidst the tubes and machines but peaceful. A nurse murmured that he had responded to their voices, his eyelids fluttering, his fingers moving. The path ahead would be arduous, but the obstacle was no longer insurmountable. Later, when she finally succumbed to sleep, curled on the hospital sofa, I stepped outside to contact Alexandra. She didn't answer. Instead, I left a voice message. I am not the man you once knew. I have changed, not through charity, not through guilt, but because I have finally understood what it means to truly be present for someone, not with money but with my time, with my heart. If that makes me foolish in your judgment, then so be it. I ended the call. The following day, flowers arrived and books from individuals I didn't recognize, messages from neighbors, from the parents of children in the reading group. They had learned somehow and they wished to contribute, to give something back. But I didn't require anything. I already possessed what I had lacked for years. Purpose. Not tied to my company, not to my wealth, but to my life. And for the first time I didn't feel solitary. Ethan's recovery progressed slowly but steadily. Each day offered a new indication of progress. A slight twitch of his fingers, a subtle lift of his eyelids. The first complete sentence he whispered caused Sarah to finally break down, not in his presence of course but later in the hallway. She wept into her hands and I stood beside her, not attempting to fix it, simply allowing her space for her emotions. The hospital became a familiar environment. Nurses greeted us by name. We learned the routines, the quiet pauses between tests, the alternating cycles of hope and apprehension. Sarah never left his side and I never left hers. It was during one of those protracted nights that Carmen appeared. She was Sarah's sister. I hadn't known she existed. They hadn't communicated in over a decade. Family pride, unresolved silences, the usual reasons. But now Carmen was there, holding a small bag, her eyes filled with unspoken questions. I observed them converse in hushed tones near the window, too distant to discern words, but close enough to witness the barriers between them dissolving. When Sarah returned, she offered no explanation. She simply said, "Thank you for giving him a chance. And for giving me mine." We didn't discuss the implication. It didn't matter. What mattered was that Sarah appeared lighter, stronger, not because things were easier, but because she was no longer carrying her burdens alone. The day Ethan's eyes fully opened, he requested juice. Sarah laughed. A genuine, unrestrained laugh that made her shoulders shake, the kind that makes everyone around you smile too. I brought him a book not merely about Mars but about the entire galaxy, and he consumed every page as if it were vital air. "Uncle James," he said, "when I grow up I want to be like you." "Don't," I answered immediately. "Be better. And if you can, bring someone with you." A week later, Sarah received an invitation to speak at an educational forum. Someone from the city had heard about her initiative at the community center. Her story had begun to spread, not as gossip but as inspiration. She almost declined. "What if I don't belong in that room?" she asked. "You belong in every room," I told her firmly. "Especially the ones where no one expects you." She stood on that stage with an air of quiet authority. Her voice was composed, steady, clear. People leaned in, captivated, listening not because she was renowned but because she was authentic. Afterward, she stood beside me, clutching a piece of paper listing new contacts, new opportunities. "I'm scared," she confessed. "Me too," I admitted. "But we proceed nonetheless. That's how we evolve." And then Alexandra called, her voice not angry but curious. "Can we talk?" We met at a cafe, quiet, central, neutral territory. She looked weary, perhaps older or simply humbled. "I don't understand all of this," she conceded. "But I see that it holds significance for you." She paused. "And maybe I need to see it too." I offered no verbal response, merely a smile, because sometimes transformation begins simply with showing up. A year elapsed just like that. Not fast, not slow, just full of alterations, full of learning, full of moments that wove a new pattern into the fabric of my life. Ethan was walking again with a slower pace but steady. Sarah was now leading workshops, not exclusively for children but for mothers, for families, for anyone who felt marginalized and yearned to be heard. And I became James again. Not Mr., not Sir, not billionaire. Just James. I still participated in some meetings, maintained contact with my board, but my heart resided elsewhere, in the Saturday mornings, Amidst the chalkboards, in the scent of well-worn books and crayons, in the sound of Ethan's laughter when he connected with a new friend, in the way Sarah's gaze would briefly meet mine when she thought I wasn't looking. The mansion felt quieter these days. Alexandra didn't visit frequently, but when she did, our conversations were genuine, not about business or strategy. We spoke of our childhoods, of regrets, of forgiveness. One evening we sat in the garden. She asked, "What will you do with all of it?" All of what? The fortune. The legacy. The empire. I looked up at the stars, the same ones Ethan cherished. "I'm going to give it away." She blinked once, then twice. "To whom?" "To those who will use it to construct, not to command." I explained the foundation I was establishing: autonomous, transparent. "Sarah will serve as one of the advisors." "You're giving her a seat at the table?" "She's already been leading without one." "You're not concerned about public opinion?" "Let them talk." I have finally found peace. That night I composed a letter. Not for public consumption, not for the press, but for myself. "Dear James, you lived most of your life believing power lay in control, in barriers, in distance. But you were mistaken. True power resides in connection, in presence, in affection. Sincerely, the version of you who at last learned to truly see." Weeks later, a ceremony took place in the park adjacent to the community center. It wasn't a grand affair, just people who mattered: families, friends, students. Ethan sat in the front row, Sarah beside him, Carmen as well. Alexandra stood on the periphery, observing, listening. I walked to the front, no formal attire, no prepared notes. I simply spoke. I dedicated decades climbing ladders, chasing figures, earning accolades. But none of it compares to what I have discovered here, to what you have given me: a chance to matter, to create meaning, to reconnect with my humanity. People applauded, but I wasn't finished. I looked at Sarah. "You altered my life, not by rescuing me, but by allowing me to witness yours." Her eyes welled, but she remained composed as always. Afterward, as we were tidying up, Ethan gently pulled on my sleeve. "Do you still have that book about Mars?" "I do." "Can we read it together? Just one more time." "Always." We sat on the grass beneath the trees. The world continued its rotation, but in that moment, nothing else existed. Just a boy, a story, and the man who finally understood life's true essence. Months later, the leaves began their descent once more, golden, deliberate, as if the universe itself was reminding us to release, to create space. The air grew cooler, not harsh, merely enough to make coffee taste richer, walks feel more tranquil, silences hold deeper significance. Sarah and I had found our rhythm, not as employer and employee, not even strictly as partners, but simply as two individuals who had genuinely seen each other, who had remained when leaving was an option, who had chosen authenticity over convenience. Some evenings we sat in her kitchen sharing tea, listening to classic music on the radio. Ethan would be asleep, Carmen reading in another room, and we would just exist together. No agendas, no debates, just presence. "You know," she said one night, gazing into her mug, "I used to believe love was something grand, theatrical like the movies. And now I think it's someone who shows up. Who stays through the mundane parts, the difficult parts. Someone who remembers how you take your tea." I smiled. "I used to think love was control." She raised an eyebrow, not surprised. "But now I think it's freedom. Freedom to become who you truly are, with someone who recognizes it even before you do." The silence that followed was resonant, filled with understanding, with shared history, with anticipation. We didn't marry, not immediately. There was no urgency, no need for formal declarations. Those who mattered already knew. And the connection we had built didn't require a label. It merely needed space to flourish. The community center thrived, supported by assistants, grants, and volunteers. Sarah trained others, established teams, developed structures. Ethan spoke at schools, at various events. He shared his journey not with bitterness, but with passionate conviction. One evening he stood on a stage, nervous yet proud. "I thought my life was over," he stated, "but someone saw me. Someone believed in my mom, and she believed in me. Now I want to do the same for others. Because every child deserves to be seen, and every mother deserves to be heard." His voice wavered, and so did mine. Later, in the car home, he asked, "Do you think I'm ready?" "You were born ready." He leaned back, a smile spreading across his face. "I think we're going to be okay." "We are." I confirmed, looking at the city lights twinkling through the windshield. We really are. And as we drove into the night, past the towering structures, past the clamor, past the old life I had shed, I felt it again. Not success, not pride, but peace. A rare, profound peace. The kind that arrives only when you have finally found your way home. Not to a physical location, but to the people who illuminate what truly matters. And I understood then that everything I believed I had lost had simply been waiting on the other side of courage.